Welcome, everyone, to the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. I'm your host, Desiree Stanley, and with me today is my guest, Judy Kane. How are you today, Judy?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I am so excited to have you on the show and have you share your knowledge with us. This topic is so fascinating to me, and so I can't wait for the listeners to learn more. I'm going to have you share kind of how this all came to be for you. Judy is the founder of Aligned Consciousness. And really, I'm curious, what was the inspiration? What was it that you just decided this was the way that you wanted to go?
It's kind of a long story. I spent decades in IT management. I had a short stint as a realtor. And somewhere during the beginning of those realtor years, I saw this process that I learned to help people change subconscious beliefs. I had not been exposed to many modalities. I didn't disbelieve anything, but had very limited exposure. But I saw somebody use this process with my second husband, and he had a pain or an ache. I don't remember what it was. Something hurt. And this person asked if he'd some help, and he said, sure. And they did. I watched them, and in less than 5 minutes, the pain was gone, didn't come back. That was impressive. I was watching, and unlike some modalities, which were mysterious to me, this was a process that I could follow. I could see how it was done. Nobody was interpreting messages or sensing or moving energy or doing anything like that. This was a very straightforward process. It appealed to my IT brain. I started taking workshops because I was really curious about how this worked. I took as many as were possible to take, some of them more than once. And I was only doing it to work with myself and people I knew. I had no idea I was going to turn this into a business. But the more I learned about it, the more I felt I needed to be able to offer it to more people. So I learned it in 2011 and I started my business in 2014. And that's how it started.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
And you kind of mentioned different modalities. And so you're talking about something perhaps like a Reiki, which is energy movement, or something that may be with a spiritual guide or something like that. So for you, talking about how you established or began to learn about this modality specifically, share with us a little bit more in detail of what you're describing here.
Sure. People don't usually care what the process is called, but it's called Psych K. It's been around since the 80s, and it involves a fast change process for transforming subconscious beliefs. But you can usually transform most beliefs in less than 5 minutes. It's very fast. Now, a lot of situations have a lot of beliefs that are contributing to it. So people don't come in and change major aspects of their life in 5 minutes. But so far, I've never had a phobia client that took a full hour. It's very effective. Those are usually pretty limited number of beliefs. They might be intense reactions with the phobias, but they don't usually have a lot of beliefs that are causing it, which is why those are easier to take care of in a short period of time. But it is a fast change process. I don't work with people on their behavior or strategies. I focus on the subconscious belief change. So I frequently work with coaches to support them if they've got clients that are stuck in their coaching programs.
Yeah. Okay. That's excellent. Thanks for kind of detailing that a little bit more for
Mm.
us so we get a little bit more of an understanding of what you're working on. And you had described in the beginning about how your husband was experiencing pain. And so I was curious what was happening there that made that go away. And you're working with people to change subconscious beliefs. And so let's talk more about that because these often, we don't know where these come from sometimes. And
Right.
so let's discuss that a little bit.
Sure. When we come in, we have very little in our operating system, so to speak, right? We come in and we're little sponges, and we're designed that way to absorb the beliefs of wherever we land. So we pick up all the messages, all the beliefs, all the customs from our immediate family and other people that are impacting us or institutions that are impacting us in some way. And usually by the time we're 7, we've pretty much completed that process. And the reason these subconscious beliefs are so important are they build our perspective of the world. They contribute to about 95% of our impressions of ourselves, events, other people. So they're really important. It's our default system. So if we're not intentionally doing something, this is what we fall back on. And those beliefs can be very helpful. That's how we learn a lot of things that we need to know. But a lot of times they do not support our conscious goals. And when that happens, it causes stress because you're trying to do something. And whenever you're not focused really hard on doing it the way you want to do it, you fall back to that default system. And so there's stress there because you can see something you want to have happen and you are working to do it, but it's really hard sometimes if you've got subconscious beliefs that are blocking it. And an example would be that I worked with somebody who thought that for a business to be successful, it had to get a very slow start. Now, he didn't know that was his belief. He knew he'd started a business and it wasn't going anywhere. Part of the process we go through, people come in, they tell me what's going on, they tell me what they would rather be experiencing. And then we try to find what the subconscious beliefs are that are preventing that outcome that they want. And so we discovered that one of his subconscious beliefs was that businesses are more successful if they get a slow start. So we changed that to his belief was I can have a successful business that takes off really quickly. Businesses can be successful in a short amount of time. Affirmation style statements are what we're installing into the subconscious. And he had a major breakthrough in 2 weeks. It was really interesting. I love it when I get the feedback that's what's happened because I frequently only have 1 or 2 sessions with people and they've gotten to the result that they wanted to have, especially if they're working with coaches because they've already done a lot of discovery around the issue. They just don't really know how to change it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so fascinating, Judy. Thank you for sharing that story with us about a particular client. And I think that I love how you are saying and this really is the IT background, right? Is the system like software and that you're installing this system software as you're growing up from childhood. And it's such an interesting way to look at it. And it makes sense for me having grown up in Silicon Valley. That was my whole world, right? Computers and all of that. And so it totally makes sense to me. And I think that it's a great way to think about it because we can get our brains around that idea, right? And so changing that software or that kind of programming is really what we're talking about doing here. And I think that many of us have goals that we want to achieve. And like you said, we're maybe not seeing them happen, even though we're working towards them. And I think that this is such a common feature that many of us have maybe fitness goals or health goals or business goals or whatever that we're trying to achieve and maybe not seeing it happen and don't understand why.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So what I tell people to do is look for patterns, right? That's the clue that subconscious beliefs might be part of the issue. If they've got a pattern of always feeling a little freaked out when they think about doing something, or if they're self sabotaging, or if their relationships always have the same pattern that's not what they want. You look for the patterns in things and then try to figure out from that what might be causing it, or it gives you a clue where to start anyway. The interesting thing when I work with people is when I ask them what they'd rather be experiencing, frequently they don't know because they know what they don't want and they often know what they are trying to avoid, but they haven't put the time into figuring out what is it they really want. So that can take them back a minute to think because they just haven't looked at it from that perspective before.
Yeah, Judy, that's such a great point. It is important to know what we don't want, but we have to take the time to think about what it is we do want. I think we don't spend the time on that aspect of it. And if you don't know where you want to go or the end result you want to have, how are you going to get it? And that is key, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then this kind of leads me into how can we change some of these thoughts and these maybe beliefs to begin to get to where we want to go?
Figure out what you want. It's always a good first step. Sometimes I have seen subconscious beliefs change when people take the time to get very detailed, to give their subconscious really clear examples of what it is they're going for. And when I tell them to, what do you see? And they'll say, well, I'm looking happy. And it's, but that's not, tell me visually what the details are. You're walking at an even pace, or you've got a smile on your face and your eyes and forehead are relaxed, or your hands aren't clenched. But really getting into the details of a picture as if you were describing a picture on your phone or a silent movie. Really get into those details of what you hear and especially the emotions you're feeling with these things, because that can go a long way. My personal belief is that's the difference between people who have success with affirmations and those who don't. That those who can really get immerse themselves into the feeling of what it is they're talking about, I think those are probably ones where the affirmations have worked.
Yeah. And that's another excellent point right there is tying in the visualization, the image with the emotion and how you want to feel. And all of that really kind of cements this together, right?
Yeah, it does. It really
Yeah.
does. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So I wanted to ask you from what you had mentioned before about you've got these goals, you've got where you want to go, but what if your beliefs aren't lining up with that? And so, talk us through that. What can we do to begin to bring those into alignment?
Well, you have to figure out where the issue is. And this is where, if you look for the patterns and see where they aren't what you want, and you start that visualization process, that's the best I have seen most people be able to do at home. Is just keep working at the things that you want. You can also examine some of your self talk very critically and see if that what you're telling yourself is really true. Because a lot of things that people call themselves bad names when they're talking to themselves. It's not the cheerleading squad for most people, but the things they're saying aren't based in it. So sometimes that can help. But the thing with subconscious beliefs is that they don't get changed by logic or data.
Mm.
So you can't just like, if you could, all the people that are terrified of flying would be able to change it because they know it's safer to get on the plane than drive to the airport, statistically. It has nothing to do with logic or a lack of information. It's pure panic there. And so that's the challenge with it of one, finding out what it is. Most of the people I work with don't really know what the belief is that's or what the beliefs are that are causing the issue. They just know what's not happening for them or where they have discomfort or disbelief.
Yeah, good stuff. That point that you made about you can't logic it. Like you can't just, as much as we want to talk ourselves out of things or into things, it doesn't work that way. So, and the airplane is a perfect example, myself included, not happy to fly. Most times I want to go places, so I've got to do it. And so it's, yes, there comes a point where you have to do a bit of the self talk and remind yourself that everything's going to be okay. But maybe let's talk about what are some ways that you can begin to change those thoughts so that there isn't that fear of flying or whatever fear somebody else might be having that they want to overcome.
I would get with somebody who can help change those beliefs would be my advice. Yeah, it's you can some people can power through getting on the plane maybe with the help of a pill or something. And others really can't. They just cannot bring themselves to do that. They will limit themselves. And that's the thing with these beliefs. All the subconscious beliefs are limiting people. If
Mhm.
they're afraid of failing, then they're not going to try things if they aren't sure they're going to be able to do them well. A lot of times I work with people who have a fear of success because, and there are a lot of reasons for that, right? It can be too expensive for them in terms of maybe they have beliefs that you have to work 24/7 to have a successful business. Or maybe there's a scarcity mentality that there aren't enough clients out there. And scarcity can impact we all know people who never have enough time for everything. You hear people say that all the time. That's a scarcity mentality. You've got the time, but if you believe you don't, then you're going to fill it up with the non-priority things so that you run out of time. So there's scarcity of money, scarcity of time, scarcity of resources of some sort, fear of being seen, fear of being heard. There's a good reason for that for a lot of people, but it's a big fear for a lot of people of standing up in front of a group and saying anything. Being the center of attention is not a comfortable place for a lot of people. Imposter syndrome, all those things are connected to subconscious beliefs that keep us being smaller than we need to be, being quieter than we need to be, or just totally stressed out because things aren't the way we'd like them to be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Judy, that's excellent. The limiting beliefs, these are things that keep us from attaining whatever it is that we want. It's keeping us stuck. And what you just shared about, I don't have enough time. I don't have enough time. And I know the story of people who have a goal or some business they want to achieve, whatever it is, but it's, oh, the spice rack is calling me. Like, I need to go alphabetize the spice rack. And it's, no, you don't really need to do that. That's avoidance. And there's definitely some fear that's happening there.
Yes, and that's a beautiful example. When you're advertising the spices, when you're getting ready to do a presentation the next day, take a look at that. There's
Mhm.
a message there that your subconscious is protecting you from whatever it thinks is bad about doing that presentation. But there's
Yeah.
so many beliefs like that. Boundaries. Most of the people that I work with, the beliefs center around fear of some sort or self-esteem. And so a lot of the self-esteem ones you'll see with people who can't maintain their own priorities. Somebody comes in with something else and that goes to the top of their list and their priorities go to the bottom or can't maintain the boundaries. There's so many things there that are making people feel less than.
Yeah, good stuff. What I want to talk about now is if you're perhaps in a relationship or trying to develop a relationship with someone or maybe get into a relationship with someone, how are these subconscious beliefs maybe impacting that?
Yeah, I frequently serve as a resource to coaches, and sometimes they just put me in their packages. And so people who sign up for the package get a session with me. And one of those coaches, in fact, what she coached on was finding your soulmate. So I had a whole lot of people who were in that program that came to me that we would work with the things. And there were some really interesting common beliefs around some of them that all the good ones are taken. We hear people
Mm.
say that all the time. But if you don't believe that a really good match for you is out there and accessible to you, you're not going to find them because you won't see what you think doesn't exist. So in relationships, finding a new one is believing that there is there's more than one good match for you out there. But also, there's so many other things in a relationship of thinking enough of yourself to be okay revealing who you are to the other, right? A lot of times they had beliefs that they weren't deserving of a loving, supportive relationship. And we would always start with a statement about them loving themselves because you need to love yourself before you can get into that relationship that you really want. But being able to have difficult conversations to calmly be able to establish the boundaries. There's so many things in relationships that are related to those subconscious beliefs. If you didn't see a working relationship that was positive growing up, then you probably saw one that wasn't working positively, and that sends messages. These subconscious beliefs aren't all things that people told you to believe. A lot of them you just observed.
Yeah. So that made me just think about the expression, it's more things are caught than taught. And so it's like you observe these things growing up. And so this is kind of what's getting lodged in your brain and you're not even realizing it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm sure a lot of parents would be horrified at the message that they inadvertently sent to their children. So,
That's right. That's right. Because it's do as I say, not as I do kind of thing where you are trying to tell them something and teach them something, but that's not what they're seeing. And so more often than not, they're going to be copying what they saw.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of them is generational. People only know what they learned or observed.
Mhm.
So you can have the same patterns passing down from generation to generation without anybody thinking they were a particularly good idea.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing that a lot where young people now are really trying to work on that kind of intergenerational trauma and things that have been carried on, like you said, being passed down without even realizing it. So I
Absolutely.
think that's huge. And something else that you shared in there that really spoke to me was the point about you're not going to see it until you believe it. Really, you need to believe it before you're going to see it.
Yeah. Because you won't. Your reticular activating system is not going to let you access the stuff that you don't think is there. It's going to be focusing on the lack thereof. Yeah. So that was one of the first. Yeah, I had several of them. It was so funny. This I can still remember this one woman who lived in a huge city out in Asia, but it was a really big city, and she said, "But there aren't any eligible men here interested in a long-term relationship with the qualities I'm looking for." And I bet there are. Let's change
Yeah.
that first, and then we'll get to the rest of the beliefs. But yeah,
And that's such an interesting point is that how we set these barriers for ourselves so often, and we don't have to, but it's we just keep saying these things over and over again. And so that's what we're going to keep seeing
yeah,
is what we're repeating. Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you about your book. And this is the Your Four Truths How Beliefs Impact Your Life. And so I want you to share that with us now because it sounds so fantastic. So tell us about it.
yeah. I started reflecting on how to categorize all the changes I've been doing with people, and everybody comes in with different beliefs for different reasons. There's no standard set of beliefs that I take people through or checklists or things like that. But when you look at them after a while, you could see that things kind of fall into groups, and my mind tends to group things. So what the book is talking about are four categories of beliefs that seem to be causing the most distress among the people that I have been seeing. And they are that you're safe, that you are worthy, that you're lovable, and that you're connected to something bigger than yourself. And so most of the things I've seen fall into one of those categories, and sometimes they overlap categories, right? But those are really big things, and they speak for the most part for basic human needs, right? We need to feel like we're safe. And once we've gotten the physical safety out of the way, there's that all the emotional safety that we really need to be taken care of, like the fear of being seen. Right? That's usually not an accurate danger. Most of the time, people that have the worst panic attacks talking to a group, they're probably not going to be physically hurt doing that. So, but it's like all the phobias, right? You can't take that panic away if you've got that fright in you. So the safety stuff is a big deal. And then the worthiness. And it's not just how you feel about yourself, it's how you think people feel about you. So valuing yourself and knowing that others value, that's very important for your well-being and fulfillment. You need to know that what you do is valued by others as well. And being lovable, we need those relationships. We need to love ourselves so that we are comfortable in loving relationships and authentic. We're not doing it, well, I've got to be this way with this person or they won't like me or they won't love me. So that's the third category. And then just being connected to something bigger than yourself is huge. You're isolated if you don't feel like there's that connection. And then the last part of the book is physical symptoms of stress, because the stress can cause all sorts of mayhem in your body. And the mind body connection is impressive. The story I told about my husband with the pain going away in 5 minutes. And I've seen this happen where it's that much of a connection that's very clear that if it's a couple of beliefs that are causing something that's uncomfortable or worse, and if you change those, that can go away because your body is just trying to give you messages that something's not right. And once you can correct what's not right, it can stop giving you those messages.
Oh gosh, Judy, that sounds fantastic. Really, I'm excited to get my hands on it, and I'll of course include the information in the show notes for the listeners to find. But there's a couple things in there that you said that, first of all, the public speaking is what the number one fear that people have, and why that is so interesting because it's like this idea of being seen, being heard, of rejection, and how important it has always been in our society and throughout history about being included and not being rejected or pushed out. And so I think this is kind of like a basic fear that so many of us have, but it's really not about speaking so much. It's about all the other parts of it. So I think that's so interesting. And talking about worthiness, and this is another big one. And the idea of we've heard about having self-confidence and all of this and trying to teach children to be self-confident and how worthy and self-confidence are not really the same. They're different, right? And so I think it's really interesting looking at this worthiness component. And so I love that. The four truths, I just think this is so great. And the idea of safety, and it is what Maslow's hierarchy, and safety is like the base, right? We've got to feel safe before we can do anything else. And so I think that's a huge point. So I'm sure that's an important part of your book.
Right. Yeah. It does look at those Maslow hierarchies because, and I hadn't thought about it until I started putting it together for the book. And it was like, this sounds familiar. Maybe I should go and brush up on that. And it's like, what do you know? Yeah, this fits right nicely in there. Yeah.
I'm also curious, just kind of on another note, about the writing process for you. When you decided that you wanted to write this book, was there like you suddenly realized I needed to write a book about all of these things, or was it just like some other process that you went through to decide you were going to do this?
It was pretty sudden. I had never told myself I'm gonna write a book one day. It's certainly not a fiction one. When I was younger, I would think, "Oh, that would make a good story," because I'm a big reader, but this was not on my radar for very long before I started working on it. And it's the same reason that I do podcasts and presentations. I want people to understand that they don't have to just accept these things that are limiting them. People say, "Well, it's just the way I am, and there's nothing you can do about it." And that's not true. You don't have to accept these things if you don't choose to. There are choices out there that can make your experience more interesting and fulfilling.
Yeah, I love that, Judy. It's such a great point. People can be stubborn about it and just say, "This is how I am, and I'm never going to be any different." And it's, well, okay, then that's the case.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to be stuck or you don't want to have this be your reality, there's a way to change it if you choose to. And so I think that is a huge point.
Yeah. So writing it was interesting. It certainly helped me. The process of doing it was really helpful in clarifying things that I knew, Because this was all just based on my experience. There's nothing academic in here. But uh, clarifying what I had seen, trying to categorize it, trying to make sense of it so I could explain it. It was a really beneficial process.
Yeah, good point. It's like tunnel vision almost. You're kind of like focusing in and maybe getting rid of things that aren't necessary, but really clarifying, like you said, and just detailing it in a way that makes sense and relays the information to the reader in a way that gets to them and really helps them solve their problem. It
Yeah.
sounds like.
That was the goal.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I wanted to ask you if there's things that they can do right now that you feel would help them begin to change patterns that aren't working for them anymore. If there's something that you wanted to share with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's back to finding out what those patterns are, paying attention and going, "Oh, I've seen this before." Because a lot of times people don't do that even. They don't stand back enough to see this has happened more than once. It's probably not a coincidence. So notice the patterns and then figure out with each of them, what would you rather be experiencing? And then just go deep into the details of how that looks, how it feels, how it sounds, all that. Just as many examples as you can think of, well, when that's true, this is what it's going to look like when I'm in this situation, or this is how my life is going to look because this other thing changed. Just getting very clear with examples of how that's going to look. Those are the two big suggestions I have. And if that doesn't get you where you need to be, find somebody who can help you change those subconscious beliefs. There are lots of people who do different modalities, and there are lots of ways to get this done.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you need the help, there are people and resources that can help you. And that's super important to know. There are people who can help you if you need the help 100%. Thank you for sharing that. And so I did have you share your book. And I always love to ask my guests if there's other books that they've read or are reading now that they think are beneficial or helpful that they want to share with the listeners. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Well, on the topic of subconscious beliefs, one of my go-to authors is Bruce Lipton. He's written The Biology of Belief, The Honeymoon Effect, and he talks about from a scientific standpoint what happens with the subconscious beliefs and how they play out in your health and in your relationships. And he's got a lot of science behind what he is doing because he is a scientist and a doctor. I'm not an MD, but a PhD. And so it's interesting reading, I think, for people to see all of the evidence that he has gathered about the subconscious beliefs and how they can impact you.
Yeah, and that just reminded me of the point that I wanted to make earlier and the mind body connection. And you were talking about how the stress and these thoughts impact your body and cause pain or discomfort or whatever. And you're right, like your body is trying to tell you something's not right. We need to figure out what's going on. And if you continue to ignore it, it's going to get worse. And so
Right.
I love that you're sharing this book with us now because here's evidence, like scientific evidence showing that this is the case, right? What's happening in your thoughts in your mind is affecting your body.
Absolutely. It's very clear. And once you read some of the science behind it, it's kind of stunning because we're used to thinking that if we get rid of a symptom, it's going to take care of the situation. And it's really not the best way to go because your body will either get louder or find another way to get your attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So such a great point. I think that we do want to be fixed, right? We want to get better. And so the easiest, simplest way to do that is to go see the doctor and get some kind of pill or whatever medication, something that's going to make it better. But we're not really solving the problem.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good stuff. Is there any other books that you want to suggest or recommend, or if there's podcasts that you enjoy listening to that you want to share with us?
There's so many things I listen to. I couldn't possibly single it out, but I always like to talk about Bruce Lipton because he's on the topic. And so when people are curious, that's a really good place to start.
Excellent. Well, I will for sure include the book and his podcast information in the show notes for the listeners to find. And of course, your book as well, Judy. I have my guests always share if there are questions that the listeners have, if they want to dig into this a little bit more, maybe follow along with the work that you're doing, how would they be able to find you? Is there social media that you want to share, website?
I'm on Facebook as Aligned Consciousness. I'm on LinkedIn as Judy Kane. I have a website and it's got a bunch of resources there. And it's got some resources that can be downloaded that talk more about subconscious beliefs. It's got a link to buy the book, which is available in a lot of places. And there's also a way to schedule a 15-minute call if somebody has questions, more questions about the process or how it might help them specifically. Always glad to talk to people about that. And my
Excellent.
website is alignedconsciousness.com.
Perfect. Yes, for sure. And that all that information will be in the show notes as well to make it easy for the listeners to find. But thank you for sharing that, Judy, and sharing this information with us. And really, the takeaways that you've shared, it just what we can begin to do right away, examining these thoughts that we're having and exploring that. If we're seeing these things repeatedly occurring, let's look at that, right? What is happening here and how that shift can make a difference going forward. So I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you, Judy, for coming on the show. I have so appreciated your time and this information and sharing it with us.
Well, I really enjoyed the conversation and appreciate the opportunity to spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely. And more people who can get this information and can begin to make these changes is fantastic. So, absolutely. And that is why I wanted you on the show for sure.
Thank you.
Well, we'll talk more soon.
Okay.
Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Pockets of Knowledge podcast. We appreciate your time and curiosity as we explore fascinating topics together. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to join us next week for another amazing episode. Remember, your journey of learning and growth is a continuous adventure, and we're thrilled to be part of it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next week, stay curious and keep exploring those pockets of knowledge.